In the winter of 1944, as the world burned, one German soldier faced an impossible choice: kill the enemy and live, or show mercy and die. History remembers the men who fought, but this is the story of the man who refused to. The frozen silence. The winter of 1944 was the coldest in years. Snow buried the forests of Belgium like a white shroud. The war was reaching its breaking point, and Hitler's final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, had begun. Tanks crawled through the fog. The thunder of artillery echoed through the Ardennes. And in the middle of that chaos, a 21-year-old German corporal named Johann Müller found himself leading a handful of exhausted soldiers through enemy territory. They had no fuel, no food, no radio contact, just the sound of the wind and distant gunfire. For days, Johann's unit had been cut off from their battalion. The men were frozen, terrified, starving, but orders were clear: no retreat, no surrender, and so they marched, through the ruins of burned villages, past the bodies of friend and foe alike. One night, as the snow fell heavier, they reached a small farmhouse on the edge of a forest. It was the only shelter for miles. Inside, they found a small family: a mother, her young son, and 2 wounded American soldiers hiding in the corner. The Germans raised their rifles instantly. The mother screamed. The child cried. And Johann stood there frozen, staring at the men he had been told were his enemies. They weren't holding weapons. They weren't fighting. They were bleeding, dying, and in that moment, the young corporal faced the kind of decision no uniform could prepare him for: kill them, or let them live. The choice that changed everything. The farmhouse was silent, except for the wind pushing through the cracks in the wooden walls. Johann's men aimed their rifles, their breath turning to mist in the cold air. The 2 wounded Americans tensed, one clutching his side, the other whispering something that sounded like a prayer. "Sir?" whispered one of Johann's soldiers. "Orders?" Johann didn't answer. He could hear the distant rumble of tank engines, German armor moving somewhere to the east. Help was close. If he just waited, the SS patrols would sweep through here. The Americans would be executed, and no one would ever know. But he kept staring at the family. The mother's eyes, terrified yet pleading. The little boy, maybe 6 years old, gripping her coat, and the 2 soldiers, barely older than him, shivering, wounded, and helpless. Johann's mind screamed with the voices of his training. They are the enemy. They killed your brothers. They are the reason for this war. But somewhere, deep under the noise, another voice spoke, quiet, human, and honest. They are just boys. Like you. He lowered his rifle. His men hesitated. "Put your weapons down," Johann said softly. They looked at him, stunned. "What?" one hissed. "Sir, they're Americans." "I said put them down," Johann repeated, his voice firm now. "This family, these men, they're not our fight." The others obeyed, reluctantly. Johann stepped forward and knelt beside the Americans. Their uniforms were soaked in blood. He tore a strip from his own coat and pressed it against the soldier's wound. The man flinched. Then, in broken German, whispered, Why are you helping us?" Johann didn't know how to answer. He only said, "Because someone should." That night, they all shared what little food there was, a single loaf of stale bread, divided into pieces so small they barely filled a palm. The Germans, the Americans, the mother, the child, they sat together around a candle flame, and for one night in that endless winter, war stopped at the door. The dawn, betrayal. Morning came quietly. The world outside was white and silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Inside the farmhouse, the candle had burned to nothing. Only the smell of smoke lingered, and the faint breathing of men who had found a fragile peace for a few hours. Johann stood by the window, watching the tree line through a cracked pane of glass. Somewhere beyond those woods, the front was shifting again. He could hear distant artillery, like thunder rolling across the horizon. One of his soldiers, young, anxious, and loyal to the party, approached him. "Corporal Müller," he said carefully, "what we did last night, It was treason. Johann turned his head slowly. Treason, he repeated. We spared 2 dying men. The SS doesn't see it that way, the soldier replied. If they find out, they'll shoot us all. Johann looked back out the window. Snow was falling again. He thought of the boy asleep beside his mother, and of the 2 Americans whose breathing had grown shallow in the night. They won't find out, he said finally. We leave before dawn. The family stays. But fate has a way of listening to promises like that, and twisting them. Because not an hour later, the quiet was shattered by a sound that froze everyone in place. Engines, trucks, men shouting in German, an SS patrol. Johann's heart pounded. He looked at his men, terrified faces. There was no time to run, no way to hide the Americans. He turned to the mother. Don't speak, he whispered. No matter what happens, don't move. Then he took a deep breath, grabbed his rifle, and stepped outside. The snow crunched under his boots as he faced the black uniformed officers walking toward the house. Their insignia gleamed under the pale morning sun. Corporal Müller, the SS sergeant barked. Report! Johann saluted sharply. 2 enemy soldiers were here, he said. We've handled it. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Handled? He stepped closer, inspecting Johann's face. Show me. Johann's hands tightened on his rifle. Inside, his men waited in silence. And the Americans were still breathing. The blood in the snow. The SS sergeant pushed past Johann without waiting for permission. Boots thudded against the wooden floor. The silence inside the farmhouse broke under the heavy rhythm of authority. Johann followed, his pulse hammering in his throat. He could already see it, the Americans lying weak in the corner, the family clutching each other, the fear that hung in the air like smoke. The sergeant stopped. His eyes fell on the wounded men. Then he turned slowly toward Johann. You said they were handled, he said coldly. They don't look dead to me. No one moved. The other soldiers, both Johann's and the SS patrol, froze. The only sound was the soft crying of the child. Johann's mouth went dry. He could feel his heart pounding against his ribs, his mind screaming for a way out that didn't exist. The sergeant's hand went to his pistol. Explain yourself, Corporal, he said, or I'll put a bullet in all of them, and then in you. Johann stood straight. He looked the man in the eyes, and for the first time since the war began, he felt something stronger than fear. They're wounded, Johann said quietly. They needed help. The sergeant's jaw tightened. Help? He stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. You think we help the enemy now? They're human, Johann said. They bleed like we do. The blow came fast, the sergeant's fist cracking across his face, sending him staggering into the wall. Blood ran from his lip. You disgust me, the sergeant hissed. He turned to his men. Execute the prisoners. Johann's soldiers looked at him, desperate, uncertain. He could see it in their eyes. The question, do we obey or follow him? Johann didn't think. He moved. He stepped between the SS and the Americans, raising his rifle. Not to fire, but to block. No one touches them, he said, voice trembling but firm. The sergeant blinked, half in shock, half in rage. Are you out of your mind? I am a soldier, Johann said. Not a murderer. For a moment, one impossible second, the world stopped. Then came the sound that shattered it. A single gunshot. It echoed through the forest, through the snow, through the silence of men who had just witnessed something they couldn't undo. Johann fell to his knees, a bloom of red spreading across his chest, his rifle slipping from his hands into the snow. The SS sergeant holstered his pistol without a word. He turned to the others. Finish them, he said, and walked out into the cold, but no one moved. Not one soldier. Because in that single act, Johann Müller had done something that no order could erase. He had shown them what courage truly was. The aftermath of mercy. The gunshot echoed through the trees, then faded into the winter air. Snow kept falling, quiet, endless, as if the world itself wanted to bury the sound of what had just happened. Inside the farmhouse, no one spoke. The SS patrol left, boots crunching over snow, voices fading into the distance. And in the middle of the floor, beneath the faint light from the window, Johann Müller lay still. His body was half in shadow, half in sunlight. Blood darkened the snow around him, melting it into small red rivers that trickled across the wood. The boy was the first to move. He stepped forward, trembling, holding a small wool blanket in his hands. He didn't say a word. He just placed it over Johann's face. The two Americans, weak, barely conscious, stared in silence. One whispered something softly under his breath. The mother didn't understand the words, but she knew what they meant. It was a prayer. That night, when the SS patrol didn't return, Johann's men made a decision. They carried his body out behind the farmhouse, dug a shallow grave beneath an oak tree, and buried him there, without a name, without a uniform, without orders. Only one of them, a quiet soldier named Richter, carved a small cross out of a broken rifle stock. He pressed it into the snow at the head of the grave and whispered, "He was better than all of us." Before dawn, they disappeared into the forest. The Americans survived. Days later, Allied medics found them, still in that same farmhouse, alive because of one German soldier who refused to be cruel. They told their rescuers what had happened, about the man who saved them, about the man who paid with his life for mercy. No one knew his name. No record existed, only the memory, carried by two men across the ocean and by a small family that never forgot. The Forgotten Grave. 20 years passed. The war ended, nations rebuilt, and the world tried to forget the things it had seen, but some memories refused to fade. In the summer of 1964, a car stopped on a quiet road in the Ardennes, the same forest that had once burned with war. Two men stepped out, both gray-haired now, both with eyes that had seen too much. They were the American soldiers from that farmhouse, and after 2 decades they had come back. The locals had told them there was nothing left, that the farmhouse had fallen apart years ago, that the snow had buried everything. But they walked anyway, through the trees, through the silence, until they reached a clearing. There, beneath an old oak tree, they found it, a weathered wooden cross. Half buried in moss and snow, the words carved into it were faded, almost gone, but still visible. War besser als wir. He was better than us. The men stood there for a long time, neither speaking. One of them knelt and placed a small metal tag at the base of the cross, his own dog tag. Then he whispered, "You saved us. You never even knew our names." When they left, the wind rose softly, rustling the branches above Johann's grave, and for a moment it sounded almost like applause, a whisper of gratitude carried by the forest that had once hidden his mercy. Johann Müller's name was never written in any history book. No medals, no monuments, just a story passed from one soldier to another, from one family to the next, a story of a man who chose humanity when the world had forgotten it. Because war creates monsters. But sometimes it also reveals the last remaining light inside them. And in the frozen silence of that winter, a single German soldier reminded the world that mercy is the bravest act of all.